You're listening to episode 123 of the D6 podcast.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 podcast. Here's your hosts, Ron Hunter and Jeremy Lee.
This is the family ministry podcast that helps you connect the church and home. And today, I think it's okay for me to say, Ron, we've got the Godfather here, man.
We do. We do. We're not supposed to show favoritism, but I just can't hide it.
Dr. Richard Ross.
Yes. He is the man.
He really is. And, there's a lot of things I can say about him that I respect, but he just kind of has this. He had swag before swag was swag.
Exactly right.
He like walks around with kind of like just. I don't know. I think it's just this posture of distinguished gentleman type deal.
And he's never showing off while doing it. Just everybody knows it exists.
Nope, and that is true. But there's just this air of, you just have to respect the man almost.
You do.
And this is why I like our topic today, because he represents the youth ministry nation. Mm-hmm. But he has written a book where he talks to the pastors, because he's like the big brother who kind of sticks up for his younger brother and says, "Hey man, you gotta do this or that." He says things that we wish we could say to the pastors because he's got the swag to do it.
That's right. And lead pastors often ignore their student pastors, or they trust them so much that they let them run and do. And he's calling them back to a partnership. Yeah. He's calling them back to be involved and intentional with each other.
Yeah, I'm just so thankful, because we really need this voice, and we need somebody to say this message. Nobody better than Dr. Richard Ross. So we're going to be hearing from that today.
Yeah, I want to throw in one more item, Jeremy. D6 has been around since 2002, 2003, when we launched our first curriculum, and that's not that long. Dr. Richard Ross has been championing the same message. He hasn't called it D6, but he's been doing the exact same philosophy, the same teaching for 25 years before we were doing it. Mm. And I just want to give homage to that, I've learned so much from this distinguished friend, professor, mentor. He's real. He is the real. He lives with his family, with his wife, his son. As a professor, as a trainer, as a speaker, he is the guy that you want to get advice from.
Like I said, the Godfather.
Yeah, he is.
All
okay,
right,
I'm done oozing, but no, I could keep going.
I'm not done either, because he's going to be with us at the D6 conference this year, right?
Yes, he is.
And we want to mention really quickly that the registration for that is closing very soon.
It is. You don't have long, but you still have the ability to get in, because it's, what is it now? It would be 2.5 weeks away, roughly.
And if you are, especially if you're near Greensboro, North Carolina, so if you're in South Carolina, North Carolina, maybe East Tennessee, if you're there, that's kind of a quick trip for you, and it's not that hard. And if there are still spots, grab them.
That's right, because you're going to get a chance to come hear Lee Strobel. You're going to get a chance to hear Robbie Gallaty, Dana Gresh, Sadie Robertson. There are so many great names. Richard Ross is certainly going to be there. Brian Haynes. Many of the people who we interview, they're part of those core speakers. There's nearly 50 total speakers. And the topics that we're going to be dealing with are just principle-driven and idea-driven, to where you're going to walk away with practical ways that you can make a difference in your church the next week, but get them on the right footing for what Dr. Ross has been teaching for 35, 40 years now.
And I really need this next interview that you are going to do with Aaron Pontious. I'm very excited to hear that, just because, I've got go-tos with my boys. I can talk to my son about, hey, did you see the highlights of the Duke game last night? Or, hey, Hudson, what tier of Fortnite are you on? Or, I've got all these different questions that I can ask to get good small talk conversations going. I kind of got that nailed down. But when it gets to deeper conversations, how to do that, when to do that, what to say, I'm not as good. And so I could use all the help I can get. So I'm thankful for Aaron Pontious. That's the topic you're going to be having, leading students and parents into deeper conversations. So that'll be a great topic for us as well later in the show. But we're going to begin now after the break with the Godfather, Dr. Richard Ross. He's going to be talking to us about how senior pastors can help be the catalyst that leads Reformation in the youth ministry. It's a great topic. It might be one to share with your senior pastor. Just listen to it first and see. And hope you guys enjoy it. We'll be listening to it right after the break.
Are you looking for the right conference to attend this year? The D6 Conference is a family ministry conference designed for your entire ministry team. Come hear from over 30 speakers and network with churches that share your passion for reaching families. Family ministry isn't just another program. It's one of the most important things your church can do to make a difference in your city. At the D6 Conference, you'll be inspired and equipped to take your family ministry to the next level. To learn more about the D6 Conference, just go to d6conference.com.
We are honored to have Dr. Richard Ross with us. Thank you for being here, sir.
Love it. Proud to be here.
You are like D6 is like, I don't know, it's like one of your children, right? You've been around since the beginning, isn't it?
It has been a joy to watch this. I did get to speak on the main stage the very first year.
Yeah.
I told the people that day that many of us had dreamed about a focus on families, and the church snored through all of that. But I really felt that the D6 conference was the church waking up to the issue, and to watch all that's happened for 9 years, it's been pretty exciting.
Yeah, well, Dr. Richard Ross, I love that you start your bio as husband to Lawana. And she's joined him in a lifetime of loving teenagers. They're parents of Clayton. And he served as youth minister for 30 years and now is a volunteer with teenagers and parents at Wedgwood Baptist. I know that church. Richard is a professor to the next generation of youth ministers at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth. Since its inception, Richard has served as the spokesperson for the International True Love Waits movement, written 23 books. Is it 24 now with your 24 books for youth leaders and parents, and speaks in over 35 conferences and churches each year. That's a lot. That's a lot. Thank you for being with us. I'm confident that you don't write a book unless God tells you to write it. So please tell me the story behind, we're going to talk actually about 2 books today, but I want to talk about the book that you wrote, The Senior Pastor and the Reformation of Youth Ministry. How did God bring that to your heart?
Well, I think several things brought that to my mind. For one thing, not in every case, but in some cases, a senior pastor stays in a church maybe longer than youth pastors who might come and go a little bit more quickly. Therefore, it would be an advantage if somebody was thinking a little bit longer, a little bit more holistically about how is this church going to shape its ministry with teenagers. But the bigger issue really is this: to create lifetime disciples out of teenagers. There has to be some fundamental changes in the church. That's not just me. I think a lot of clear-thinking people are saying we have got to make dramatic changes in what we're doing with teenagers. Okay, youth minister may get that, may know the scriptures, may know the research, may have a heart to just turn this whole thing upside down. I don't think that person has the capital to bring about that kind of change in every instance. And I think sometimes a youth pastor could just change things and get fired in the process, or at the very least receive biting criticism. So really what I think we need is the senior pastor leading the way. He understands the power structures of the church. He understands how change takes place. He could, from the pulpit, create a biblical rationale for change. And then, as he leads the church to make fundamental changes, then the youth pastor could come in right behind that and actually implement these new directions.
You know, it's interesting that you address senior pastors rather than youth ministers as the catalyst. You just mentioned a little bit, but I guess overall, it feels in an idealistic way, you would think a youth minister would be able to do this. You know, it seems kind of almost frustrating that it has to be a senior pastor.
I can understand that, but you know, people, we all kind of make jokes about this, but people in the church just tend to stay set in their ways. They are enamored with how we've always done things. And I think maybe a younger adult shows up and just says, oh, I'm going to change everything. I think defenses go up. People aren't sure what that means. There's nothing people can become more volatile about than their own children. And I think people can get emotionally involved. I just think in lots of situations that they tend to trust the pastor. Their assumption is the pastor's leading us in a good direction. So if he takes some of the initial leadership toward making changes, I think in most cases it's not going to blow up as badly as if the youth pastor does.
In the past, you've one of my favorite things, I think I always mention this to you, is your teaching on the role of the youth in the revival movements and spiritual movements in our history. So I guess one of the questions I had was the senior pastor is the catalyst for change in a church. And again, idealistically, if it's not the youth minister, why couldn't it have been the youth themselves as the catalyst for change?
I think part of the problem there is we have we've culturized the teenagers to think a particular kind of way. Let me give you an example. For 60 years, actually, we have said to teenagers, oh, the coolest thing on earth is to be with people exactly your age. There's nothing more exciting than being in a room full of people just like you. Certainly, that's going to be more interesting than being around some grody old adults. Okay, if we've trained young people to think that, of course, that's not only in the church. The whole culture has taught teenagers that. You wouldn't expect the teenagers to wake up one day and go, wait, we're being stunted by this. We're missing being connected to the entire congregation. We're missing the wisdom and the relationships that we otherwise could have. Oh, we must bring about change. It wouldn't occur to the teenagers to think that way because we have conditioned them to assume being with peers, full life at church with peers is all that matters. I think somebody has to take a 30,000-foot look at that and say, hey, half the kids are leaving the faith after high school. We probably ought to drop back and do this a different way. Somebody with some objectivity that knows how to slowly, carefully guide teenagers to start valuing other relationships. I'm just using that as one example, but it is an example of the fact that I don't think the teenagers would have ever nurtured that kind of change on their own.
So let's say the pastor maybe gets a copy of the book or hears this message, and then they're challenged to go along with it, right? But a pastor has a lot of their own struggles, man. They have to keep the lights on, right? They have to make sure people are showing up. They have to deal with all the complaints. They have to be kind of the theological guide of the church. There's so much that goes on. I could see a pastor saying, Dr. Ross, I respect what you're saying, but my goodness, I don't have the capacity for that. That's why we hired youth ministers to do this. Why do they need me? So can you maybe address that a little bit?
A couple of thoughts. One thought is this. We're asking the pastor to take a leadership role in fermenting change. That's not forever. That is for a season. Okay. You're simply saying, okay, this year, one of the things I really need to give attention to is moving our church into brand new directions related to young people. Then I can give attention to maybe some other things. Another thought that comes to my mind is, it sounds like a cliche, but the teenagers really are the future of the church. And for somebody to say, I'm too busy, I can't do that, it's like McDonald's saying, we're really busy, we don't have time to sell hamburgers. You're missing what is central to your existence. And not just young people that grow up to become the church. We've got all kinds of research. Churches that have a vibrant student ministry, churches that have that front section filled to overflowing with teenagers, those churches tend to prosper in lots of other ways. It's exciting to the church. Families are drawn to a church with student ministry. So it's not just the pastor saying, well, I'm doing work that's not going to bring any reward. Not so. You do the work that gets that student ministry much more alive, and in essence, you're creating a healthier church in the process.
Okay, so I'd like to hear some inspiration here. Maybe tell us some stories of pastors who've read your book, or pastors that you've seen that have kind of done this, that have done what you've challenged them to do, and we're seeing some traction in their churches.
One of the most exciting things I've observed is I do hear from pastors saying, oh, please, give me a name. I've got to hire somebody. And if I can help them with a name, I do. But most of the time, I will say, I want to get in your hands a copy of a book, Senior Pastor, Reformation of Youth Ministry, because while you're in between people, this is a wonderful time for the church to really think through, where are we philosophically, where are we going in our student ministry? And I clearly have heard from pastors who have said, not only did I read the book, I had the entire search team read the book, and we have turned a corner. We're not looking for the same kind of leader we thought we were looking for. We're now looking for a different kind of leader. That encourages me. And actually, there is some advantage to a pastor not having to take a youth minister who doesn't get it at all and figure out how to work around that. So that's been encouraging to me, that churches that are already at a point of transition have made it a transition that really has worked, and then they've gone out and called the person that's going to fit into that new perspective.
That's great. Okay, let's take a little bit of a switch here, because at the D6 conference, you spoke on the main stage. Was it last night?
This morning.
Mm-hmm. And it's really from the subject of a new book that is that by the time this comes out will probably be well into the marketplace and people will know more about it. But it's called Youth Ministry That Lasts a Lifetime. And I think this is kind of the goal we all have if we're going to be in the youth ministry space, is to make that long-term impact, not short-term. So can you kind of lay out what that book's about, give us kind of a synopsis of it, and help us understand the challenge that you're issuing?
I can give you a very concise and very clear report on what the message of the book is.
Okay.
It's pretty simple to do. Everybody knows we lose half the kids at high school graduation. Everybody knows that. I have been fascinated lately with the half that stay. Most of the research is about those that leave. I wanted to know what those that stayed are like. And actually, we now have some good studies. The young people that become disciples, they follow Jesus for a lifetime, they have three characteristics. One characteristic they have is they are coming out of spiritually alive homes. Mom and dad love Jesus. Mom and dad are on mission. I'm not talking about being in Christian work. I'm just saying mom and dad get up, and generally it's their perspective of the day that I'm going to honor Christ and see his kingdom come on earth. The young people that stick are those primarily that have moms and dads who are not just religious, but their faith is real, it is vibrant, they talk about it around the house. That is a characteristic of those that stick. Number two, those that stick in the church report having many, many relationships all across the congregation. It's not just me, my friends, and a couple of youth leaders. These are young people that, let's say, walk in on Sunday morning for a big church. They look across that auditorium, and in essence, what's going on in their head is, these are my people. I belong here. This is my church. Not just relationally, even though I think that is the beginning point, we do need teenagers that know lots of senior adults and middle-aged adults, and they know lots of children, and that they're just connected with the generations. But even beyond that, they're doing ministry across the generations. See, this is almost unheard of in most churches. But the young people that stick report, oh, I did some cool things as a teenager. You know, I was on a team with some adults and we did this or that. Or I was up in the sound booth and I helped those guys up there. Or there were some ladies that were protecting the lives of unborn babies and I thought that was great. And so I started helping those ladies. It's intergenerational ministry doing what the church is supposed to do, but across the age groups. That's the second characteristic of the kids that stick. Third characteristic is what I would call Bible-drenched youth ministry, or in other cases, Bible-drenched children's ministry. Or it is somebody that built an age-specific ministry, clearly based on Scripture, with leaders that look and smell a lot like Jesus, and in that age-specific ministry, they grew as disciples. The fact that I'm talking so much about the home and the family, the fact that I'm talking so much about getting teenagers all tangled up with the full church doesn't take anything away from the fact that we still need stellar ministry directly with the teenagers. So, if those are the three characteristics of those who stay in the church for a lifetime, live on mission, then my recommendation, the heart of the book is, you approach your student ministry as a ministry in thirds. And even in your work week, on Monday morning, you're saying, what could I do in 15 hours this week to impact the families where my teenagers live? What could I do in 15 hours this week to get my teenagers more involved in the ministries of the church? What could I do this week in 15 hours that would be most strategic? Obviously, you can't do every single thing you once did in youth ministry, so you pick out those things that matter the most. I would assume that would mean student worship, open group Bible study, highly intensive discipleship groups, mobilizing teenagers for evangelism, missions, and service. I think those are the things that are the most crucial. So you still do that. You do it better than you've ever done, but you still have 2/3 of a week to give to those other issues. Same principle. You divide your budget in thirds. You divide your calendar in thirds. And my theory is that young people that get all three of those in healthy doses, their tendency is going to be college days, young adult days, midlife days, a life for Christ, making a difference in the world.
I love that these two messages were together because earlier what we talked about in our time together was the role of the senior pastor, and what you just suggested, not many youth ministers are going to be able to do unless the senior pastor allows that, because isn't it true that most of the expectations that youth ministers are hired for is that last third to pretty much be all of it? So there would have to be a real acceptance of that from the leadership's perspective, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what causes me to even say I think a student minister could be fired by trying to move into this arena or this perspective without the covering, without the change coming, quote, from the top. I think a person would be at risk. But if the entire staff will carefully, gently move the church more in that direction philosophically, the people are eventually going to love it. Let me just say, when those senior adults are getting loved on by teenagers right and left, the senior adults are going to love it. When the children's ministry discovers we've got teenagers that want to serve and they want to come down to the children's area and do things that will actually serve children, they're going to love that. When a church has hug and greet time on Sunday morning and they see those teenagers not turn into each other, they see those teenagers running around all over the congregation because now they have so many relationships in the church that are valuable to them, the church is going to love that. So it's just a matter of nudging a church to get past, we've never done it that way before, to accept change, and then I think the church is going to be positive about it.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being with us. If you guys didn't catch the titles, it's The Senior Pastor and the Reformation of Youth Ministry is one book we discussed, and the other one is Youth Ministry That Lasts a Lifetime. I hope you guys will check out those books, and if you want to find out more about the books and connect with Dr. Ross online, you can go to richardaross.com. Thank you for being with us.
It's been a joy.
D6 curriculum is centered on the discipleship philosophy found in Deuteronomy 6, that parents and grandparents should be primary in the discipleship of their children. To accomplish this, D6 curriculum aligns every age in church on the same biblical passage or topic. Family alignment serves as a catalyst for parents to have conversations with their children about faith in the home. D6 also provides many other tools to help parents and grandparents. Learn how D6 curriculum can empower parents in your ministry at d6family.com.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Richard Ross. Again, I won't forget, if you guys are new to listening and this is one of the first episodes that you've jumped in on, I invite you to go back to our 100th episode. We had Dr. Ross actually come with us, and he joined us kind of in studio with other huge influential voices. And some of the things he said in that episode, I'll never forget. So I know if you've enjoyed today's interview, go back to episode 100 and 101. Yeah. It was actually a two-parter.
It was a two-part.
Huge thing. And so if you've enjoyed this, please, I want to invite you to go back. But now we got to keep moving forward with Aaron Pontious.
You know, Aaron, in full disclosure, and I think I said this in the interview, he is the youth pastor, student pastor at the church that we attend. And Aaron has been studying under Sean McDowell.
Wow.
In apologetics at Biola. And Aaron has developed such incredible gifts. He and his wife, Casey, have always been great with people, and they have mentored my kids along the years. Casey with my daughter, Lauren, Aaron with our son. In fact, Aaron performed the wedding when my daughter got married.
No way.
Yeah, just throwing that out there. He is one of the most cool guys with depth, and what we want to do is set this up so that you know how to take the conversation from surface level to a little bit more probing, if we could, and get into our kids' minds and get them thinking the right directions instead of letting only the professors and the teachers and people they have at school doing this. And he does it so brilliantly. So let's jump in and listen to Aaron as he guides us here. I want to welcome Aaron Pontious to the D6 podcast. Aaron, you're no stranger to our podcast, nor to Randall House and D6 Family Ministries as a whole. You have been living this as a husband, as a father, and as a student pastor. Let me say welcome to the broadcast, and I'll give a further introduction from there. But, man, welcome today.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I always love coming on.
Well, in your expertise, I've got a chance to witness Aaron up close in the church he's at. He's a student pastor, and the student pastor in his role has grown in responsibility. And I think that comes from the fact that there are some people you just can't give too much responsibility to. They just handle it well. You're one of those. But you go from 6th grade all the way up through college plus, kind of into that young adult category a little bit. And you've been doing this for 9 years at the Donaldson Fellowship in Nashville. Aaron, obviously, in full disclosure to our audience, my own kids came up through your youth ministry. We were talking about it off the set before getting here. They were freshmen, going up and coming rising freshmen in high school. They're not twins, they're 15 months apart, but as a result of homeschooling, they were both in the same grade. So you have a significant influence on our own kids, and I've watched you as a parent of students. Here's the question I have for you. First of all, in addition to you showing up at 23 graduations in the months of May and June, you and your wife both. You did it. I think you have some kind of transporter room that gets you there to all these places, dragging kids in tow. You show up at their ball games. You show up at recitals. You show up at all these areas. You are such a relational person, but you have a depth to your relationship, and you teach people how to have conversations that go deeper than a surface level. I want you to help our audience understand how that occurs. How do we develop that? That doesn't just happen overnight. How do we get there? Because you're big in apologetics. You got deep biblical content. How do you get students and parents into that level of depth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I genuinely love to have conversations with people, and especially young people and young parents and all these different things. And I don't know, I just found over my years of experience that, and this isn't a no-brainer, I mean, this is kind of a no-brainer, but the more that I genuinely try to live my faith in front of my students, as well as engaging with them in their own world, God just opens that door for real conversations. I mean, yeah, there's moments of the superficial, just like in any relationship, but I've found that with being super intentional in life, as well as living as best as I can, a true biblical ethic, it opens the door for conversations that have eternal significance.
So let's say that I come off the field, or I come off, the stage of a recital, and, nobody else is around. We've already talked before the event. What's that conversation sound like beyond, hey, you did a great job? How do you segue into something deeper on one of those conversations? What does that sound like? Walk us through that.
Well, I mean, I think every situation is different and every person's different. However, they first need to know that I love them. And because I love them, they know I'm going to ask them important things. And so I often will frame a conversation, hey, I want you to know I love you. And because I love you, I'm going to say something, or I'm going to ask them something. I love you too much to not ask this or say this type of conversation.
That's a good way to start into that. I love you too much not to ask this.
And I usually, if I feel like God has allowed me and my wife to be able to discern a student, at least if they're currently struggling, and a lot of times I'll ask them, to use that same example of like a recital or a basketball game or something. I'm like, hey man, or, you did great. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like you're finding some fulfillment in this? And are you feeling fulfilled in these things? And that often can open the door to, ultimately what really is fulfilling you. Are you finding true joy in life? Let's talk about that kind of thing.
Yeah. So let's say that the student looks back at you and says, hey, I'm loving sports, but man, I've got a real disconnect with my parents. What's your next level of conversation there?
That's a hard one because I actually have that pretty often.
I figured that's common for most student pastors. I mean, they have either parents that are way too busy for their lives, or they're just disengaged from the student's life entirely. I mean, there are some students acting more parent-like than their parents are.
Yeah. Well, I try not to avoid mom and dad. I try to engage in conversation with them too. But one of the things I always tell my students, I try to always give mom and dad the benefit of the doubt. Now, there are unique situations that come up and sometimes unique circumstances that could be the exception. But for the most part, parents are trying. Some just don't know how to try in certain areas that they need to try harder in. And so even if the relationship doesn't seem to be going so well, I try to encourage the student to remind them, hey, I think your parents genuinely love you. They may not know how to express this right now, but just want you to know that most of this is probably not intentional. And at least try to soften it from their perspective about their parents. But I would always go to the parent later on and kind of just talk to them about kind of how things are going, and this is what I perceive from their kid and that kind of thing. I like to help those types of relationships grow and to get better, not to foster any kind of negativity and feel like I'm the one standing in the gap. I'd rather not do that if I can.
That is a syndrome that many student pastors have fallen into. They find their own self-affirmation by when the student can identify with them more than their parent, and that actually deepens the wedge between the student and the parents.
Yeah.
So when you talk to the parent, let's say we have parents who are in church, very high on the career ladder, just very busy. They're a good parent from all apparent observations, but that there's no depth of vulnerable conversations or spiritual conversations. How do you encourage mom or dad or both of them to start having those kinds of conversations with their students so that they are providing spiritual counsel in addition to what the student's getting at church?
Well, I really don't shy away from asking mom and dad. If I feel like if they're not plugged in church or they're not even believers, I don't really shy away from having pointed conversations about faith. As long as parents know that I'm genuinely for their leadership over their family, I'm not trying to take that from them, and that they know I care for their child, I can ask almost anything.
Good.
And them feel like I'm not trying to rub their nose in anything.
Right. So what do you ask them to bring it to their attention so that they get interested in having those conversations?
Well, I like to ask questions like, what kind of conversations are you having with your child about how to process life? What kind of filter are you talking about how to process difficult things, how to process being bullied, how to process the pains of life and the evils around them? What's kind of your foundation for that? And, oftentimes they'll try to throw in God, and I think they believe in elements of that, but if they don't, I try to segue into some kind of conversation where I lead with a statement like, I really do believe that the Christian worldview is the best explanation for why things are the way that they are. And I think if we can talk about this more, I would love to share these types of things with you. And I also will tell them, I just want you to know that I am talking about these types of things with your child, and I think it's starting to help. And parents, like I said, I usually find that they're not super defensive as long as they feel like I'm caring for their kid and I value their relationship with their kid.
Right. So let's say that, you have a child who's struggling with purity issues or dating issues. Okay. Do you ever talk to the parents and say, hey, based on biblical worldview, you brought that up, and for our listeners, your graduate level studies have been in apologetics. And so this isn't coming towards a non-expert. I'm asking an expert here. Do you ever look at the parent and say, hey, your student's struggling in these areas. Is there anything that you are doing in your home that could be contributing to silently affirming this type of behavior based on either programs you're watching, attitudes? Do you ever have those conversations with parents?
Yes and no. What I mean is, I wouldn't lead with that because that can cause defensive mechanisms.
Absolutely. And I know we can't launch in there, but I got to be really blunt in the 10 minutes we have. Yeah.
But at the same time, I get what you're saying. But at the same time, I will get to that. If I can help mom and dad understand the why I'm asking these types of questions, then those walls will fall down slowly. And if I can help the student, like if you use the sexual ethic type of conversation, it's not just, hey, follow this rule and don't do this or that. They need to know why. Why is this guideline better for my own flourishing in life? And if I can help them understand that and help moms and dads see this is why I'm trying to have these conversations with my students and with your student, then usually it can lead into conversations like, hey, what kinds of things does your child naturally watch on TV? And could it be contributing? Is it something that you guys do as a family or whatever?
Yeah, that's really good. Well, I think we could keep going, and I think there's several more questions we have. I must have to bring you back a few months down the road and have part 2 to this thing. But let me say thank you so much, because I hope this gets student pastors over the hurdle to be able to go in and love on those parents so that they can ask them the difficult questions in addition to the already great relationships most student pastors have with their youth. And I think that's what makes you exceptional, by the way, Aaron. So thanks for your work. Thanks for your ministry. I appreciate it. And thanks for sharing your wisdom with our listeners.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I love you. And we always enjoy being a part of your ministry as well.
Well, our thanks go out to Aaron Pontious. He also will be with us at D6 Conference this year.
That's right. So we've got a little bit of an apologetic theme with Lee Strobel and Aaron.
Who's that? Lee Strobel. I know.
Yeah, well, Aaron's going to introduce him and let everybody know who he is. But then we have John Stonestreet, too, another name that people may be aware of, but he's walking in some big shoes as he's the head of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. So he was mentored by Chuck Colson and is the new Chuck Colson.
And I've done D6 Conference with you now enough. I know you've got kind of lanes that you always try to fill. I know there's always going to be something about single parenting, divorce parenting, co-parenting, those kind of issues.
Yes.
There's going to always be
grandparenting.
Somebody's going to be speaking about that. But but there is a lane for apologetics every year.
Yeah,
Somebody is going to be in that lane.
Yeah, we've learned that if our kids are not able to defend their faith, they'll walk away from it. Mm-hmm. And, that's just part of immersing them in that so that they are confident in what they believe and why they believe it.
Yeah.
So that's why we put some emphasis more on other years, but every year we have somebody speaking and addressing those areas.
And that is why we do what we do. We help parents and grandparents lead kids spiritually, and apologetics is one of those things. We're going to keep helping you do that next week with Melissa McDonald, and I'm so excited about that. She's going to be talking about soul care, which is not a topic we've covered a ton on the podcast. We probably should, but we haven't.
Yes.
And so I'm very excited about that. And
I'm glad you got her to talk. She's so shy, and you just you were able to bring her out of that shell.
That's not true. Tell us about Trevor Lee.
Trevor, wow. You know what? It's funny that we positioned the two of them together because they're good friends. Trevor, I met early on when I met Melissa, I think early on at the same conference years and years ago. And Trevor and I found ourselves together in Seattle. And this guy has gone into a church and in a new situation, he had a major, we're talking about a sizable church. He had a major group of volunteers that were just burned out. It had nothing to do with him, but they said, okay, we're going to hang in here until you get in here, and then we're quitting. And they just kind of walked away, and he had to kind of pick up from there and start fresh and rebuild that ministry. And if you have found yourself discouraged for volunteers or how to get people involved, this is an episode you need to hear.
So hopefully that's enough of a tease for get you excited about next week. Please mark your calendars. We'll be back with you next week. Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it so much. Have a great week of ministry.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com. And if you're a minister, we invite you to join the D6 Leader Network by going to d6leader.net.